Wednesday, the 14th of May, 2025. Today is our annual general meeting, so we're just going to run through the agenda. We have had a council meeting this afternoon. I hope those members and guests who joined me just briefly in a visit to the library just now enjoyed their trip up the stairs. And now we'll pass on, as it's 4:45, to the meeting of our organisation. So the agenda is as follows: to confirm the minutes of the last AGM, which was held on the 8th of May 2024, which was an online meeting held via Zoom, thanks to a rail strike, I believe, that day. So do we need to hand over to Brian for that first?
Thank you. The annual general meeting of the Institute was held on Wednesday, 8th of May 2024 at 5 p.m. on Zoom. The President, Ms. Lindsay Allison-Jones, was in the chair. The minutes of the May 2023 annual general meeting were read, agreed by the membership and signed as a correct record. The President, Ms. Lindsay Allison-Jones, was retiring, and the Council recommended the appointment of Ms. Nathalie Cohen to the next President.
That would be me.
Mr. Adam Gwilt was retiring from Council, and the President thanked him for his services and support. Council recommended the appointments of Dr. Charlotte Franson and Dr. Rena Maguire. The AGM agreed the appointments proposed by Council. The Council report and financial statements for the year ending 31st December 2023, which have been circulated in advance of the meeting, were put to the meeting. The Council report and financial statements were approved and agreed by the membership. Council recommended that Mrs. Summerby be reappointed as the Institute's auditors until the annual general meeting in 2025. This appointment was agreed by the membership. The retiring President thanked the officers as well as Council and committee members for their support during her term. The Honorary Secretary thanked the retiring President for her services, support and guidance over the past 3 years. There was no further business and the meeting adjourned at 5:20 p.m. And if I can add, for this year's, the financial statements which you will have received by email, we'll talk more about that later, there is a small mistake on them in that we've managed to omit Stephen Sherlock for the list of Vice Presidents. So we're talking to Summerby about how we can amend that. So apologies for that oversight.
Okay, thank you. So is everyone happy if we confirm the meetings of the last AGM and I sign those as a correct record? Thank you, Lindsay. Thank you. I have no pen currently, but I will lay my hands to one and sign those shortly. So moving on to the business of the AGM. Sorry, thank you. Do I do this bit? Yeah. Okay, so today, item 2 on our agenda is to elect 2 members of council. There are no retiring members of council this year, but to bring council to the correct number, which should be 12, the council recommends that the following be elected as members of council. So our 2 recommendations are Mr. David Baker and Professor Howard Williams. So do we need a nominator and a seconder to approve those appointments, or is that a general consensus in the room? How do we? General consensus? I haven't actually signed that. Is everyone content with David Baker and Professor Howard Williams as our new council members? Marvellous, thank you very much. The second item under item 2 is we are very sad to say that our Honorary Secretary, Brian Kerr, is retiring. So we need to appoint a new Honorary Secretary, and we also need to thank Brian for his service over the last 4 years, which has been exemplary. So Council have identified a possible successor to Brian, and we hope to be able to make an announcement confirming that very soon, fingers crossed. Moving on to item 3, Brian has already mentioned the annual report and the accounts, which hopefully you have been able to see via email. Is there anyone who is hard copy only who has not had sight of the annual report and accounts? So I'm afraid we've had a real issue with the printer, and it is something that we are going to have to address. We're going to need a new printer because they have let us down repeatedly, particularly in this matter because they were informed well in advance of the requirement for 21 days notice of the AGM, and they have not fulfilled that. And obviously now it is the AGM and we are without the papers. So we did discuss that at council this afternoon, and we will be looking to employ a new printer to rectify this. We can only apologise. The papers were sent to them in good time. For those of you who have managed to see the annual report and the accounts, is everyone happy that we adopt the report of the council and financial statement for the year ended 31st of December 2024? Yes? Yes, so we are looking into how we make that amendment. Thank you, Caroline. Okay. So moving on to item 4, the appointment of the auditors. Council recommends that Mrs. Summersby be appointed as the Institute auditors until the AGM meeting in 2026. Does this meet with your approval? And number 5, is there any other business that anyone would like to raise as part of our annual general meeting today? Okay. We do apologise once again for the hold-up in the circulation of printed matter. Okay. So, do I introduce myself? I can. This evening's lecture. Shall I move over this way? Hello, I'm going to be your lecturer this evening. Am I okay to use this microphone? Lovely. That means I can walk around a little bit. Tonight I'm going to be talking to you about women and the Royal Archaeological Institute. I'm aware that I'm starting slightly early, so I do apologise if there's anyone who's joining online who is expecting me to start at 5, but I have a sneaking suspicion I may have too many slides. So I'm going to make a start, and hopefully we can sort of catch up as we go along. Is the light okay for everyone, and can everyone hear me all right? Okay, lovely. So we are beginning with an image by a gentleman called Samuel Reed, which shows the Royal Archaeological Institute at Wells in 1879. So this was part of the summer meeting to Taunton. And the reason that I've chosen it as our introductory image this evening is that we can see lots and lots of people in this image, and we can see lots and lots of people dressed in dresses, and even someone with I'm going to go with a pushchair there. So I wanted to look at the interaction of women with the Royal Archaeological Institute. I'm a big fan of looking at the histories of institutions, and I was also advised by my predecessor, Lindsay, that the President's lecture should be fun. I've had a lot of fun putting this paper together. It's been a nice opportunity to write something new, so I do hope that this is something that you will all find quite a lot of fun as well. I wanted to begin by acknowledging the space that we are in this evening, and just a little flashback to the library upstairs, which some of you have just visited. And I'm indebted to Barney Sloan, who pointed out this reference to me. So the Society of Antiquaries have been meeting here at Burlington House since 1874, and the Royal Archaeological Institute also has a long history of meeting here. It's actually our 125th anniversary right now of meeting in these rooms here at the Society of Antiquaries. So this is an extract from the proceedings of the meetings of the RAI from Wednesday, the 6th of July, 1910. And Mr. Charles Hercules Reed, the marvellously named president of the Society of Antiquaries, was in the chair to welcome us here to this august institution. And the paper that evening was read by a Mr. Lewis Evans, our paper on some Oriental and European astrolabes with lantern illustrations and examples. The chairman, Mr. Charles Hercules Reed, in introducing Mr. Evans, referred to the fact that this was the first occasion on which they'd met in the Society of Antiquaries, and I love the sentiment that he expressed. He extended a hearty welcome to the Institute and expressed the opinion that archaeology had much to gain by centralisation and coordination of effort. So that's something I think we would all agree with today. The Society of Antiquaries was ready to offer its hospitality for meetings and to help in other ways. And he hoped that as a result, the curtailment of standing charges would set free funds for the advancement of research. So I think we might need to revisit our arrangements with the Society of Antiquaries because it doesn't appear that they were charging us. So we're going to hear a little bit more about Mr. Evans later on this evening. But I wanted to just start by acknowledging that it's 125 years that we've been meeting in this room, in this space, which is rather lovely. So coming to the topic of tonight's meeting, I sort of had a few different starting points. The first was one of our former presidents, Tim Champion, gave a lecture in 2017 where he looked at the history of Royal Archaeological Institute presidents. And sort of took us through all the way from 1844 up to the kind of Second World War, just post-Second World War period. It's a fantastic lecture. It's on our YouTube if you want to catch up and watch it if you didn't see it at the time. He noted that the presidential lecture series was established in 1948 by Sir Alfred Clapham. It's not every day that you get to do a presidential lecture, so this has all been quite exciting. Joan Evans, who is our first female president, who we're going to be talking about this evening, gave the lecture in 1949, and arguably she is the first president to give the RAI presidential lecture, because Alfred Clapham had already retired as a president by 1948. So we have this system where the outgoing president is sort of overtaken, if you like, by the incoming president. So Joan's topic in 1949 was similar to Tim Champion's. She also looked back at the history of the Royal Archaeological Institute, and she published a paper about that very topic in 1949 as well in the Archaeological Journal. So for those of you who don't know the tangled early history, we're a divorced partner, essentially. So the Archaeological Association, which was set up in 1844, split into two different organisations, the Royal Archaeological Institute and the British Archaeological Association. So in terms of the scope of what we're going to be looking at this evening, I've taken a similar time frame to my predecessors. So from the beginnings of the organisation in 1844 up to around 1940s, 1950s, we're going to look at the presence of women at ordinary and summer meetings. We're going to have a look at subscribers and memberships. We're going to touch on publications, and we're going to look a little bit at activities and networks in these formative 100 years or so. So I've had a lot of fun going through early journals, early archives, and using Joan Evans' presidential address as a kind of starting point, because she did note different activities by women through her sort of wider thread on the history of the RAI. This is the earliest reference to a woman that I have come across in the meetings reports. So this actually predates the formation of the Royal Archaeological Institute, when we're still the main association, and mentions one of the main players in that, Mr. Charles Roach Smith, who is a very famous antiquarian and collector working in London. So anyone who's familiar with London archaeology will know of Roach Smith's acquisitions from dredgermen, from railway workers, and his incredible collection. Now, on the 12th of June, 1844, he exhibited a drawing by a Miss Sabina Heath of Andover of antiquities taken from Winterslow Down near Sarum, which had actually been excavated by her uncle, Reverend A.B. Hutchings, or Alan Borman Hutchings, in 1814. Now, these drawings that we see here on the slide are not Sabina's drawings. They were also painted by another artist subsequently. Sabina's drawings, which we have a description of in the note below, so she's writing to her uncle, the Reverend Hutchings, saying that she has drawn the pictures in sepia, the beads and the urns, all of sepia, only you must word it all in your own words. I have only one, which presumably is sepia. We don't know what's happened to Sabina's drawings. They're not reproduced in the journal proceedings, and they were apparently last seen in the possession of Charles Roach Smith. So whether they are lurking in an archive somewhere, we don't know. But this is the earliest mention that I've found of a woman sort of actively contributing to a meeting. Slightly at odds with Joan Evans' sort of paper. So all of the quotes that you're going to see in red this evening are taken directly from Joan's journal article. So she starts off by talking about the incredibly formative meeting in Canterbury, our first summer meeting of the Archaeological Association, in September 1844. And as Joan says, she takes pride in pointing out that one communication was made by a lady, Miss Caroline Halstead, on a commission from Richard III authorising the collection of alms for roofing a new chapel at Reculver. Google has definitely been my friend in terms of trying to find out more about these women who are mentioned in the records. And there's an amazing amount of documentation out there. So Caroline Halstead was born in around 1803 and passed away relatively young in 1848. She was the author of a number of different texts, as you can see. Probably her most famous was The Travels in the Boudoir, published in 1837, which is a children's book, essentially. So beautifully illustrated, as you can see in the image there, and designed to introduce young readers to the wonders of the natural and historic world. So really sort of beautiful details that you can get. And a very, as you will see as we go on to look at other women, a really broad span of interest. So looking at botany and looking at history was Caroline's particular interest. So the summer meeting in Canterbury, it sounds wild, frankly. There were mummy unwrapping sort of exhibitions. There was trips to all sorts of different places. And it was an incredibly high-profile event. It was reported upon in the newspapers of the day. It was a big event that was attended by hundreds of people. So we have this quote from the Literary Gazette, which describes a trip that was taken by the Royal Archaeological Institute to the opening of the barrows at Breach Downs, which is near Barham in North Kent. And it was a wild weather day. So you can see everyone is clustered under their umbrellas, and these people are making a break for it, and there's various people trying to hide in the windmill, which was relatively newly constructed at the time. And we have this eyewitness report from the Literary Gazette that says, such was the excitement of the scene that many of the more delicate sex retained their situations and would not lose sight of the interesting excavations. So the reporters of the day were astonished that all of these women were so interested in archaeology that they would stay out in the rain to watch the excavation unfold in front of them. And it was indeed delightful to notice the feeling with which our fair countrywomen for once made participators in an intellectual pursuit with their husbands, fathers, brothers, and friends. They examined every ancient memorial disinterred from Mother Earth. So it was noted at the time, the sort of active participation and enthusiasm of women at this meeting. This was also reflected in the interest in buildings archaeology. So one of the most sort of famous pieces of work to come out of the 1844 meeting is Professor Robert Willis's architectural description of Canterbury Cathedral, drawing on Gervaise's accounts from the 12th century. Willis took the stage, I think it's safe to say, at Canterbury in 1844, and he found a very willing audience and very excited group of people who wanted to hear from him. This is a view of the crypt of Canterbury Cathedral in the early 1850s by Samuel Prout from the collections of Lambeth Palace Library. And I'm not sure how much dramatic license we have here, if there really were sort of skulls and so on lying on the ground. But the crypt was a rather unused space in the 1850s, and a lot of it had been blocked off at the dissolution and earlier in order to create storage spaces. So this quote from the Athenaeum says that the ladies were found to take an interest in corbels and string courses, and anxiety was expressed to be better acquainted with the distinguishing characteristics of Gothic architecture. This is a desperation creeping in there. And I like this quote even more. The fever was at its height when ladies were seen following the professor through the dirt of the noble Undercroft, studying Norman capitals and playing at Follow My Leader with the Cambridge professor, through a chimney sweeper's aperture into a Norman chapel, a recent discovery. Now, absolutely fair play to them for creeping through an aperture into a recent discovery. The space that they're talking about is this in St. Gabriel's Chapel, where they opened this blocked off area. I'm not sure if that's the actual aperture that they would have squeezed through, but behind this area are the most magnificent 12th century wall paintings, which had been sort of walled off probably in the 13th century and hadn't been seen for years. So the colours are incredibly vivid and very beautiful. So you can understand, I hope, being swept up in the excitement, whether you're a lady or a gentleman, but certainly the ladies were playing a very active role in participating in this meeting. So all in all, almost 200 people had to be housed and fed, for many members were accompanied by wives and even daughters. So there is the presence of women in 1844 in Canterbury was a notable feature of this first ever sort of archaeological summer meeting. And there are some, as I say, some wonderful imagery that show women in these spaces sort of participating, or at least attending. So moving on, I'm not going to run through every single early summer meeting, but I've picked out a few just to give you an idea of the ways in which women's presence has been noted. In 1845, this is after the bitter divorce of the Archaeological Institute and the British Archaeological Association, both groups met at Winchester. The Archaeological Institute, as you can see, attracted, again, a very sort of large attendance. We've got some fantastic archaeological pointing going on here with a big, big stick. And the women are notable in this meeting in terms of presenting collections information, so reporting on discoveries or reporting on artifacts that are in their possession. So we have a metal reliquary being reported upon by Miss Godwin of Nestow in Cheshire. We have fragments of leaden vessels from Mucklney, I think it is, or Micklney Church in Somerset, from Lady Mary Long, and actually Lady Mary's drawings of those artifacts survive in the collections of the British Museum. The British Museum is a rich source for imagery, sometimes even of the women themselves. So this here, this young lady here is Miss Drusilla Way, who presented a portion of tapestry wrought in cross-stitch, being part of the pulpit hangings from the Church of Little Gidding in Huntingdonshire, so 17th century repaired embroidery. Drusilla is the sister of Alfred Way, who is our first president of the Archaeological Institute. So those sort of family networks, family connections play a big part in a lot of the women's stories associated with their actions and activities at the Institute. Also at the summer meeting, we have the report of a prehistoric artifact, a celt, found in the parish of Otterbourne in 1844 by Lady Heathcote. Lady Heathcote later led excavations in the 1880s on a series of barrows. So we have reporting of artifacts, and then many, many years later, in some cases, actual active investigation of archaeological sites. And some of the detail for those artifacts that are being submitted, like this from 1847 in Norwich, this is a Roman snail spoon from the collection of Mrs. Thorley with an incredibly detailed description. So a lot of potentially research has been undertaken to understand exactly what this artifact is and how it would have worked. Also at the summer meeting in Norwich, we can identify, as we can with the illustrations that survive in the British Museum, some of the actual artifacts that are being displayed. So this is Lady Caroline Hobart of Blickling Hall, which is now owned by the National Trust. Lady Caroline exhibited a panel painting, an ancient painting stated to have formerly been preserved in Loddon Church. And this is the actual artifact, which is now held within the collections of the National Trust. So we can join up some of these dots. By 1850, the Institute was meeting in Oxford. Professor Willis, still going, still pointing, still attracting the big crowds. This reference by Briggs in 2009 on the 1850 Congress does note that amongst all of the presentations, there was a presentation by, as he terms it, an amateur, so Miss Mary Spenlove, who presented on the history of Abingdon Abbey, which was where she lived and she owned the local brewery. So her contribution has not been published in the proceedings of the journal, and the fate of the research that she undertook remains unknown. But it is notable that she was the only woman to address the conference in 1850. So 1844 we have Caroline Halstead, 1850 we have Mary Spenlove, but her research, wherever it is, did not make it into the proceedings. So I wanted to look a little bit at some of the subscribers or the members of the Institute, so people who were not necessarily attending meetings, but were subscribing to notices and potentially to journals. This, again, a quote from Evans, our first woman subscribing member, a Welsh lady, Miss Jane Williams of Talgath, was admitted in January 1846. And Jane Williams, who lived from 1806 to 1885, has a very, very impressive publication record, including her History of Wales, which was published in 1869, but it's actually been republished in 2010. So I don't know a huge amount about the history of Wales, but this would suggest it remains a standard and useful work for modern scholars. Now, although Joan has mentioned that Jane Williams is our first subscribing member, there is actually an earlier member. Her name is Anna Gurney. She lived from 1795 till 1857. She was actually a subscriber to the Archaeological Institute in 1844, and she is listed as a member and a subscriber in 1845 until 1855. An absolutely fascinating character, a scholar of Anglo-Saxon history and archaeology, a geologist, and also a pioneer of coastal life-saving equipment. So here she is. She was also disabled, so used a mobility device. She lived with her female partner in Norfolk. They set up the local school, and here she is overseeing the installation of safety equipment on the Norfolk coast to help sailors in distress. So again, some really fascinating life histories to be explored amongst these early women. So the subscriber list, when you go through the list of subscribers and members from the 1840s onwards, tells us lots of interesting things. Sometimes you can't trace these women very much further. Sometimes it lists where they're from. You can see the impact of having a meeting in Winchester. So we have lots of subscribers from Winchester. One name that I was able to identify was Miss Yong from Otterbourne, who is Charlotte Yong, who's the novelist very much associated with the Oxford movement. So here is an image of her. In 1849, we have some new female members listed. We have Mrs. Sharp from London, who I tried very hard to work out if she was Montague Sharp's mother, but I can't quite prove that. Montague Sharp was an antiquarian of Middlesex. Miss Hill from Mansfield, and then the Mrs. Kenyon from Shrewsbury. So Kenyon is a name that we may all be slightly familiar with. Eliza Mary Hawkins married Robert Kenyon, and they are the grandparents of Kathleen Kenyon. So Eliza Mary Hawkins was the daughter of the keeper of the British Museum. So perhaps it does indeed run in the family. In 1855, again, here is our sort of list of female subscribers, and we can start to track them as well, their longevity of membership or subscription. So if you keep following them through, you can see that, for example, Miss Acton Scott was a member in 1855 and remained a member until at least 1866. I've highlighted a few of the ladies that I've been able to identify. So Mrs. Justin Villiemy, formerly Elizabeth Bull, married into a clock-making family. This lady here, Henrietta Dillon Lee, Henrietta Baroness Stanley of Alderley, is the mother-in-law of Augustus Pitt and the founder of Girton College, so a driver in female education. This imposing-looking lady, Susanna Maria Farrington, who was a member for around 30 years of the RAI, is referenced in the Archaeological Journal in 1885 as the landowner who was involved in the recovery of 65 Roman coins from a hoard of 200 found in an earthenware jar. The labourers then shared the hoard between them, so I don't think those artefacts survive, but it is notable that her active engagement with securing at least some information about them. And Susanna Maria Farrington, again, was a woman of many talents, so she illustrated this psalm here, and she also wrote a history documents relating to the Civil War printed for the Chetham Society, so of her local area in Lancaster and Chester. Louisa Ann Murray, later Lady Franklin Russell, I got quite involved, possibly over-involved in her story actually. So she lived at a place called Thirlby in Yorkshire. This is the mansion that she would have lived in. It's now demolished. There's a caravan park there. The gatehouse or the gate entrance still survives. What we know is that in 1855, Lady Franklin Russell, as she was then, led an excavation. Now, how actively she was involved in said excavation, we don't know, but she was certainly involved enough that her name is attached to it. This is the site that she excavated. It's called Pudding Pie Hill, rather charmingly, and it's near Thirsk in Yorkshire. So it's very close to Thirlby Hall. It would have been part of their estate. And actually you can see where she excavated. This is her holes, I think, at the top. This is obviously a barrow. It is now a scheduled monument. She found within it artefacts that are still preserved at Yorkshire Museum, so Roman material and early medieval burials. So I don't believe, as far as I know, that the site has been excavated since 1855. So Lady Franklin Russell's excavations remain the only ones on this site. Moving on to 1861, just one name to pull out here, Mrs. Kerr, who was a member from 1861 until 1896. So again, a very long association with the Royal Archaeological Institute. She was a noted donor to a number of different organisations, including the V&A. So here is one of her really beautiful sort of botanical drawings, which is now in the collections of the V&A. As we move on to 1866, again, a couple of names to pull out from here. The first is Mrs. Jackson Gwilt. Now, anyone who's worked in London might be familiar with the name Gwilt. George Gwilt was a noted architect who restored very significant architectural buildings in London, including St Mary Le Bow, which you see here being worked upon, and also Southwark Cathedral. So Hannah Jackson Gwilt is the daughter of George. She maintained an association and a membership with the Royal Archaeological Institute, but her interests were far beyond just the archaeology. She is also responsible for establishing the Jackson Gwilt Medal, which is awarded by the Royal Astronomical Society every year to individuals or teams who have had success in investigations of sufficient merit. I'm not an astronomer, so I don't know what would qualify. But it is so interesting that a woman was the driver for a medal at quite an early stage. So we're talking about the 1860s to 80s. Another extremely interesting character who's a member of the Royal Archaeological Institute, but whose interests lie in a very different field from archaeology, is Henrietta van Sittart, who lived from 1833 to 1883. She is a naval engineer, so she designed a patented screw propeller blade, and it was installed on a number of ships in the Victorian Navy. So an incredible sort of life story, and there are some wonderful articles written like this one that we've linked to here from the Science Museum Group Journal about the history of Henrietta and her inventions, and also the rather sad end of her life. So it did not. We won't go into it because it's a lovely evening and we're having a fun lecture. But it was a bit of a sad ending for Henrietta with her amazing and revolutionary technical expertise. So as we move into the 1870s, we are entering an era where we do have more data, and a lot of this is down to the work of a project called Beyond Notables project, which is a research project led by Amara Thornton and Catherine Harlow, which looked at the archives of the Royal Archaeological Institute and the Society of Antiquaries, specifically to look for women's histories from the period around 1870 to the sort of 20th century. So a couple of names, again, to talk about here. Mrs. Nichols of Dorking is the wife of John Gough Nichols, and John Gough Nichols is another of the founding members of the Royal Archaeological Institute. Mrs. Nichols is notable in our history of women with the RAI, as she is the first woman to propose another woman as a member. So she proposed a member, the lady just above her actually, Miss Malevera from Armagh, was proposed to the membership by Mrs. Nichols. I wanted to also talk about Mrs. Blough, Miss Griffiths, who is later Lady Reed, and also a lady that you're probably familiar with, adorned in the Priam's gold treasures, Sophia Schliemann, who was an honorary or corresponding member. So there are some wonderful accounts written of Sophia Schliemann's address to the Royal Archaeological Institute in the 1870s, 1877, and she was actually the first woman to present and publish a paper that I can find in the Archaeological Journal in 1877, which was about her excavations with her husband in Greece and Troy. So Evans, again, has identified a paper by a Miss Abrams on Bruges misery cords printed in the journal for 1915 as the first communication to be published. There are actually a few earlier ones, so starting with Sophia Schliemann and then moving through, particularly picking up from the 1890s. So it is in, I think it's 1890 that Helen Mary Tirard is publishing on the Great Sphinx. So we are seeing papers that aren't purely British focused as well in these early journals. So looking at cases of publication from the wider sort of European and Middle Eastern contexts. Margaret Emily Blau was very active in Sussex, so a very active member of the Sussex Archaeological Society along with her husband, and she produced this drawing, which was used in Mark Lauer's book of 1871 about Bodiam Castle. And it's lovely because it shows details that no longer survive, actually. So a lot of this barbican is now demolished or pulled down, and it's a bridge here now rather than a very substantial looking causeway. So women are writing, women are illustrating, women are collecting, women are presenting. And Mary Emma Elizabeth Conway Griffith Reid, or Lady Reid, who lived from 1840 to 1917, is an interesting example of a collector. So she is noted as sort of showing parts of her collection to the Royal Archaeological Institute, and a search online just on her name and archaeology brought up this, which was from an auction website. So this was an auction that was held in 2017, where the auction lot was Lady Reid's Cabinet of Curiosities, the antiquities, relics, archaeological objects, curios and minerals collected by Lady Reid for her cabinet in the 19th century, including objects found on her estate. So a number of these can be identified with objects that she also showed at Royal Archaeological Institute meetings. I don't know what's happened to this collection, but it's lovely that we have a snapshot at least. So this is a quote from a scholar called Linda Ebertson, who wrote her PhD dissertation on the history of the Royal Archaeological Institute, and drew some really interesting conclusions around the presence of women and what we could sort of glean from these notes that we are finding. There is obviously, as one might expect, looking at Victorian history of an institution like the Archaeological Institute, there is a tendency towards women in more privileged positions and being able to find out more about them having more access to these spaces, these places, and quite a lot relating to their connections to men, so their fathers, their brothers, their husbands, and so on. Every so often, though, we do get, as Ebertson quotes here, a little insight into other women. So this is a group of artefacts, Romano-British culinary and dietary utensils, that were found in North Wales and reported to the Archaeological Institute in the late 1880s, but had originally actually been reported in the local journal, the Historic Society of Lancashire and Cheshire, considerably earlier, so at least a couple of decades earlier. And it's that earlier, the report, that has more detail. So the 1880s report to the archaeological meeting notes that some of these bronze vessels had been preserved by Mrs. E.M. Humphreys of the Cambrian Arms, so of the local pub, I'm assuming, and that she had since secured 4 other vessels. So we have active collection by a woman in a less privileged position. But it is really, really interesting to note that it wasn't Mrs. E.M. Humphreys who initially identified these significant artifacts. So there is a really brilliant quote from this 1860s journal that says, in or about the year 1862, whilst engaged in ploughing a somewhat elevated but yet secluded field among the hills, an old farmer named Hughes encountered a quantity of, quote, rusty pots and pans, the bulk of which he very stupidly sold for their metal value. The only person of his household who had the sufficient sense to desire the retention of a few pieces was a servant girl, Mary Owens by name, to whom we are indebted for preserving from the melting pot or furnace the sole representatives of what may safely be designated as the most valuable discovery of Roman culinary bronze vessels ever effected in this country. That's a big claim. But it is really interesting to note the influence and activity of two women in this story, neither of whom are coming from that privileged background, but who are identifying the importance of these artifacts and securing their survival. What has subsequently happened to them since the 1880s, I do not know, I'm afraid. So, the Beyond Notability's website is a fascinating resource, and I do highly recommend that you spend some time within it. There are a number of essays written looking at sort of evaluating the data that has been pulled out of the archives. Particularly interesting series of essays by Sharon Howard, of which this graph is taken from. So starting to look at unpicking those different women's interactions. So are they corresponding with the RAI? Are they donating artifacts to the RAI? Are they exhibiting? And as you can see in the later period, are they actively participating and speaking at meetings and so on? So as we move into the 20th century, this is a photograph from 1905 and shows the meeting at Tunbridge Wells, which if we ever do another meeting at Tunbridge Wells, I think we should reenact this view, because look at that, there's some splendid hats going on there. We can see a real growth in membership in those early decades of the 20th century. So from those sort of slightly more scattered mentions of women in the archives, so we're talking about an institution that in its first 50 or so years has hundreds of members, the vast majority of whom are men. By the time we move into the early decades of the 20th century, the membership is somewhat smaller and the proportion of women is starting to increase. Again, this is a graph from Ebertson, which shows that sort of steep growth, together with a quote from her work. So this understanding that we need to sort of look at these women as, the ways that they are interacting with the Institute is mediated in many, many, if not most of the cases, through their interaction with male members of the Institute, and also through their background of privilege. So as we move through the 20th century, I'm obviously not going to, as I have done now, sort of try and list out every single female member, because we would be here for a very, very long time. So I just wanted to pull out a few examples to set the background for talking about Joan Evans. And really, you cannot do I don't think you could present a lecture on women in archaeology without showing this slide of Nina Layard in what looks like the most dangerous trench ever. This is Foxhall Road in Ipswich. This is a Paleolithic archaeological site. This is Nina herself actively excavating with a pickaxe on some super dodgy looking shovel boards. Nina Layard was a member of the Royal Archaeological Institute by 1905. She is a prehistorian, a scholar, and famous for her excavations, particularly in East Anglia. She is also notable as a very early member of the Society of Antiquaries, as a fellow. She is sometimes referred to as the first female fellow of the Society of Antiquaries. Here is her election paper here from 1921. That is not correct, however. She is not the first female member. The first female member is Rose Graham, who unfortunately I could not find a single photo of Rose Graham, even though she lived until 1963. She is the first female fellow of the Society of Antiquaries in 1920. Here is her blue paper. And she is referenced by Joan Evans. So in 1928, Miss Rose Graham is our first woman member of the Royal Archaeological Institute Council. So she's an RAI member from 1917. She's the first female vice president for the RAI in 1932, from 1932 to 37. And she is the first female president of our, divorce partner, the British Archaeological Association, 1944 to 1951. So she's a significant figure in women's history of institutions and a significant scholar in her own right. So she's a medieval historian. Following Rose's presence on council, we also have some other amazing characters acting in managerial and administrative support capacities for the Royal Archaeological Institute. So this is Thalassa Crusoe Henkin, who was the Assistant Secretary for the Royal Archaeological Institute from 1931 to 1935. She worked at the Museum of London. She was an assistant to Mortimer Wheeler in the costume collection, and she also led the excavations of an Iron Age hill fort in Worcestershire. When she married a fellow archaeologist, Hugh O'Neill Henkin, they moved to America, and she became a television presenter. So she is a horticulturist. She presented programs on, I think it was PBS, called Making Things Grow. And here is a still from her broadcasting career. Another assistant secretary for the Royal Archaeological Institute was Vera Mary Dallas, who followed Thalassa Crusoe as assistant secretary. And again, I could not locate an image of Vera Dallas. She is an Iron Age, apologies. She is notable actually in terms of her support for other women in sort of proposing as members for the Royal Archaeological Institute. She is the top person for proposing and seconding other women to be members of the Royal Archaeological Institute. So a significant figure in the history of the Institute, supporting other people's access to the organisation. As we move through the 1920s and into the 1940s, so 30s and 40s, we start to see some hopefully more familiar names to everyone. So we have Tessa Wheeler, who was a Royal Archaeological Institute member in 1929. We'd never want to say that Tessa Verney Wheeler is famous as the wife of Mortimer Wheeler. It's the other way around, and a brilliant excavator in her own right, and a prime mover in the foundation of the the Institute of Archaeology in London. Aileen Fox, also a Royal Archaeological Institute member in 1932. She excavated especially across southwest England. She was an Iron Age and Roman specialist. The lady next to her, this lady here, is Iona Gedge, who is a conservator. So she established the conservation department at the Institute of Archaeology, or the repair department, as it was known here. So she's an incredibly important pioneer in archaeological conservation. Next to her is Dina Dobway-Portson. Sorry, I always get her name wrong. Dina Portway-Dobson, who was an archaeologist and a caver. She also worked in broadcasting, and she was a script writer, and she worked as a Justice of the Peace for 30 years. She advised Philip Raats on some of his early excavations, and because she was a caver, quite a lot of the pictures are of her looking down incredibly tiny holes. So I think she was a pretty amazing character. Dina Dobson was a council member from 1932 to 1936. Kathleen Kenyon, who we've already mentioned this evening, was a council member from 1935 to 39. Peggy Piggott, who I'm sure I really hope everyone is very familiar with Peggy Piggott, Whitehall Camp, Sutton Hoo, an expert on beads, many, many, many strings to her bow. She was on council during that wartime period. Helen O'Neill, who is next to her, is another Iron Age specialist, particularly working in Gloucestershire, again on council during the war, 1941 to 45. And finally, Jaquetta Hawkes, who's this striking-looking lady here, who's so many strings to her bow. She's a prehistorian, she is a writer, again, another broadcaster. She was a co-founder of the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and she was the archaeological advisor to the Festival of Britain. So incredibly talented women, and this is the background to Joan Evans' election as president, the first female president of the Royal Archaeological Institute, because she would have been sitting on council meetings, on committee meetings, with a number of these women. And again, another quote from Ebbetson, by 1942, the number of women in the Institute approached 1/3 of the membership, with a similar proportion, 26%, of seats on council and the executive committee. So we like to think we're sort of reasonably moving towards some kind of equality here. So this is another direct quote from Joan from her presidential address. So she says, "Such then is our history, modest enough, but with an English quality of endurance and perseverance about it. We still have the same subscription as we had in 1843. So I'd like us all to bear that in mind when we talk about membership rates. I do not know how much longer it can be maintained. We still pursue the same policy of winter meetings for communications and a summer meeting for seeing buildings and sites. We have become, I think, a more learned body with the years, but there is still plenty of room for the amateur in our ranks, though I fancy I may be the last amateur, as I am the first woman to have the honour to be your president." So let's look at Joan, who describes herself as an amateur. She comes from an archaeological dynasty, you might say. So this is her father, Joan Evans, and this is her mother, Maria Lathbury Millington. When Joan was born, her father was 70, her mother was 37, so she had much older siblings. This is one of her half-siblings. His name is Arthur Evans, and he is very famous, obviously, as the excavator of Knossos. She had a number of other half-siblings, including Lewis, who we've already met right at the beginning of this talk, and also Alice, her half-sister, who actually passed away before Joan was born. So Alice passes away in the late 1880s, and Joan is born in 1893, and had what sounds like a fairly lonely childhood. Her parents travelled a lot. She was mainly brought up by her nanny, who stayed with her until she died, Nanny Hancock, in her 90s. So right up into the 1960s, she stayed with Joan. And Joan wrote her own autobiography, Prelude and Fugue. So a lot of the information that we have about her early life can be taken directly from that. So we know she went to the local grammar school. She decided to read classical archaeology at St. Hugh's, and she was the only female archaeology student at the time, and one of her few fellow archaeology students was an Australian named Gordon Child. So again, these networks sort of building. Joan is a prolific writer. So she starts publishing as early as 1921, and her earliest sort of publications are focused around English jewellery, particularly medieval jewellery. She is the first woman to give a Royal Institution lecture on that subject in 1923. So in terms of her connections with the Royal Archaeological Institute, she is a member from 1930. She's a council member 1937 to 41, so crossing over with a number of the women that we've already been looking at this evening. And she's elected the first female president of the RAI in 1948. In 1948, she also published with the Archaeological Journal an article on the medieval Wilton diptych, of which this is an image. So her connections with the Society of Antiquaries are also long-standing. She was actually in correspondence with the Society of Antiquaries as early as 1918. She sat on numerous committees. She was a vice president of the Society of Antiquaries in 1949, director in 1955, and she became the president of the Society of Antiquaries in 1959 in a deeply contested election. So Natasha McEnroe, the current Secretary General of SAL, sent me the paper. If you've never read it, it is a story of Mortimer Wheeler at his absolute worst. He could not countenance the thought of a female president, and he did his best to make sure that Joan was not elected. Apparently, there was such an uproar that there were 183 fellows in this room who voted her in, who demanded that her name be on the ballot and voted her in, and then there was a stamping of feet and a rousing roar when she was actually elected. But Mortimer Wheeler did all that he could to try and put someone else in that position. It's an astonishing story. So just turning to Joan's publication records, she is another woman who is coming from a very privileged background. So a lot of the roles that she undertook during her long and very varied life, she probably wouldn't have considered it as a career because she, in many cases, she was not being paid. She was coming from a background which meant that she was able to undertake honorary positions without remuneration and was also free to explore her interests. So her main focus of interest lay in the medieval period, particularly in jewelry, in architecture. So she's published widely on Cluniac architecture. But really, to describe herself as an amateur when you have a publication record that looks like this is very modest, I would say. So as well as publishing on archaeological and artifactual material culture, she also published on John Ruskin and sort of philosophical thought, and she wrote histories of the Society of Antiquaries. She wrote histories of our organisation, and she wrote history of the Conway family. So the Conway Library at the Courtauld Institute is one of the most significant collections of historic photographs, and Joan was the executor of one of that family's wills, so was responsible for arranging some of this material to be deposited with the Courtauld, where she was also incidentally an honorary librarian and lecturer. A woman of many talents. She bought this amazing Norman chapel in France. So she purchased this Cluniac chapel in Mâcon in 1948 and restored it and then presented it to the community as a historic asset. And she was an incredibly important figure for the Society of Antiquaries, so not just as their first female president, but also because of her amazing connections. So her father had been the president of the Society of Antiquaries. Her brother had been the president of the Society of Antiquaries. This did not mean that Joan expected it as a hereditary right, but maybe that's how Mortimer Wheeler was justifying it to himself in terms of trying to prevent her. One of her most important sort of connections with the Society of Antiquaries was the saving of Kelmscott Manor in the 1960s. So we can see this quote here. This is Joan herself. "We have just inherited a beautiful and interesting house which we cannot afford to keep." But only a week later, after she said this, came a providential legacy of £350,000 from a Morris fan, Susan Minney, which enabled the Society to keep the building. Now, it's important to know who Susan was. So, do you remember we mentioned earlier in this talk one of Joan's half-siblings, Alice? So Alice married a gentleman called William Minney. She died very suddenly, Alice, leaving a 3-year-old daughter. Her 3-year-old daughter is Susan. So there is a family connection to this incredibly generous benefactor in ensuring the survival and the securing of Kelmscott Manor via Joan Evans, because Susan Minay is her, would that be, half-niece. So the family connections have helped to support and secure this incredibly significant archaeological site. So I had a go at making a little sort of diagram for Joan Evans, just to try and capture all the different, well, not even all the different, this is not even all of the different things that she was involved and engaged in during her long life. But you know, she is our first female president, but she was incredibly active across a huge number of different organisations. So we mentioned St. Hugh's College, which she attended during the sort of World War I period. She was their honorary librarian until 1922. She then sat on their council until 1958, and she was an honorary fellow until 1977, until her death. Notably, she's also a generous benefactor, which is something else that we see repeated across a number of different organisations. So we've talked about the Courtauld, an honorary librarian and a lecturer there, and she wrote this significant history of the Conway family. British Museum, she was a trustee from 1963 to 67, and she donated a large collection of material to the BM. Society of Antiquaries, we've talked about. She was also a gold medal winner in 1973, or gold medal awardee. She was the Society of Antiquaries representative for the Council for British Archaeology to their council in 1949. She was a member of the Advisory Council for the V&A during the 1950s to 60s, and she donated a very, very large jewellery collection to the V&A. And somewhat less well known, she was also involved in the initiative, so where it says the initiative of a group of local residents responsible for securing an area of landscape at Wootton under Edge. So this area of landscape was very close to where Joan lived during her later years, which is that building at the bottom there, 1,000 acres. So, as I said, I had a lot of fun and read a lot of things while I was preparing this paper. So there are a lot of really incredible sources out there to explore more, and there is a huge amount of research that could still be undertaken in the sort of sphere of women's history within institutions, and also looking at those sort of networks and activities, and lots of sort of more unpicking of those kind of queer histories as well. So Linda Eberton's papers, both in the 150th Archaeological Journal, they're building on the past, and her obviously much more detailed PhD thesis at the University of Durham, the English Heritage website, papers by Katie Meahure, Rachel Pope, Mary Davis, Elizabeth Pye, and other papers from the Institute of Archaeology, the Trailblazers website, which if you've never looked at, you should absolutely go and look at it. It's an incredible resource. And some interesting work on Wikipedia as well, so making sure that women are represented in Wikipedia entries, which are quite often the first port of call if you want to find out about someone. As I mentioned earlier on in this talk, the Beyond Notables website and the Beyond Notability project is an incredible resource, which is essentially creating biographies for these women and noting their different interactions. So there's all kinds of data that you can delve into much further beyond this talk, so including things looking at aspects, things like motherhood. So when are women having children? When are they? How does that affect their interaction with different institutions? Are they more active before or after they're having children, and so on? So we'll close with some words here from Joan herself, and she says, "We are still hard up." I'm not sure that the Royal Archaeological Institute is hard up, really. Still active, and still all profoundly convinced that archaeology is the most delightful study in the world. Except for the first, the hard up bit, I hope my successor may be able to say the same in 106 years' time. So we're at 76 years since Joan's paper in 1949, so hopefully in another 30 or so, we'll still be able to say that we are all profoundly convinced that archaeology is the most delightful study in the world. I wish you all a delightful summer of archaeology. I hope to see some of you on some of our meetings coming up, and I do hope that you've enjoyed this exploration of women's interactions with the Institute. Thank you. Thank you. And I think we have, if anyone has any questions, and I can try and remember all the facts about all these women that I've learned in the last couple of months, please do ask. Yes, Mark.
First of all, I think this has been an absolutely brilliant lecture. I'm afraid I think this has been a brilliant lecture. I'm afraid I nodded off at the beginning, but well, you shouldn't. But I've known you for a long time, and I've been interested in archaeology for a very long time, and I'm of a certain age, in my mid-80s. But I do, there's one person I would like to just mention in your lecture. This is Rose Graham, who died in 1963, you said, when I was 13. But I think, unless I'm muddling her up with somebody else, that she was quite remarkable because she had an ear trumpet. And, but I don't know whether you can confirm that or not. But I may be thinking of somebody else, but...
I would love to know more about Rose Graham, because I think it's really interesting that I couldn't find a photograph of her at all. And I would be really interested to know if she had an ear trumpet, because that's another... it would be more interesting, there's much more interesting research to be done on women with disabilities as well, working in archaeology, like Anna Gurney, and women who couldn't hear very well. The idea of an ear trumpet is amazing, and surely someone has a picture of Rose, surely. I'm going to put the call out there. Thank you, Mark. Were there any other questions? There was a lot of women in not a lot of time, so I appreciate if everyone's ready for a drink as well, then we can do that. Shall we draw it to a close? Do we need to say anything, as this is my first presidential lecture at AGM, is there anything else that, from the business point of view, that we need to say? I look to my colleagues here. It's time for a drink, our honorary secretary says. Thank you all very much for coming, and I hope people online have enjoyed it as well. Thank you.